Everyone experiences suffering in their lives. Blessed are those who know how to profit by them. These words of St. Padre Pio really, I think, embrace the wholeness of what we're about today on this Good Friday. Jesus showing us how to suffer well. And it's not automatic. Suffering can easily lead us in a bad direction away from the Lord. But I think as we look at Jesus today, we can glean some examples of how he experienced suffering, what his response was, and perhaps what ours can be, whether that suffering is something we're experiencing or maybe someone else that we love or loved. It says in the gospel today that Jesus went out when the soldiers and guards came. Jesus wasn't hiding. Jesus wasn't trying to scurry away. Jesus saw them coming and went out to meet them. And when they asked him, "Who are you looking for?" and they said, "Jesus the Nazarene," he says clearly, "I am." Jesus not wanting to escape this suffering, but clearly embracing it. Then as these men who had the weapons to inflict great violence, Jesus saw that could easily escalate. And so he wanted others not to experience the penalty that he did. So he told these men to let these others go that were with Jesus. He didn't want them to experience the same thing that he would have to undergo. He told them, let these men go. And then ultimately, when Peter himself, wanting to resort to violence, one of Jesus' closest followers wants to resort to violence, what does Jesus respond? Non-violently. Put away your sword, Peter. Did you not know that this suffering is necessary? There is no violence in my resistance, Jesus is saying to us. Then he continues as he seeks understanding of those that would hurt him. He says, if I have spoken wrongly, tell me what I have done wrong. Jesus is wanting to understand. Jesus is in a big pickle at this point, but Jesus is not reacting. Jesus is really trying to listen to see, is there something that they have on me? Not automatically discounting them. He says, if I have spoken wrongly, please let me know. And he says, if I haven't, then why are you doing this to me? He's appealing to their intellect, their understanding. And then ultimately, when they came back to Jesus and said, Pilate said, are you the king? And Jesus says, you say so. Jesus is helping Pilate to understand that his sense of Jesus as a king was off. Pilate was misunderstanding who Jesus was. So not only was Jesus seeking understanding, but Jesus was helping others to understand who he truly was. Ultimately, too, when it comes down to the wire for Jesus, and Pilate is challenging him directly, saying, do you not know that I have power over you, the power to crucify you? And Jesus does not respond again with violence, but he says, you would have no power over me if it was not given to you. Jesus is speaking the truth non-violently, in a way that blesses him and all of us. And finally, when he says to the people around, he says two simple things. I thirst, and it is finished. Jesus is remembering the goal, why he's there, why he needs to be there, why he has been embracing this cross fully on. He thirsts to suffer, not for suffering itself, because that suffering is for us out of love. And he is embracing our crosses. And he knows when it's over, the reward. And one final thing. Jesus, even in his cross, even in his suffering, is not so preoccupied with himself, but he has the ability to have concern for others and their welfare. When he says to his mother, who's going to have no one to care for her, and in that society, you don't want to be a widow. Jesus says, "Woman, embrace your son, and son, embrace your mother." Jesus making provision for both of them, concern for them in his love on the cross. How do we respond in our own lives when suffering comes to us? Maybe in certain ways we embrace some of these things, maybe other times not as much. We have the examples of Peter, who we know is going to make a heroic sacrifice later on in his life. But at this point, he's following Jesus from afar. And when it comes to identifying himself, are you the one that knows Jesus? You are one of his disciples. He says, "I am not." We're all between the women and their faithful response and Peter. We're somewhere in the middle, all of us. And Jesus accepts us where we are and wants us to continue to grow towards his example. How do we respond, though, to the suffering that may be coming to us? Maybe your mother or a loved one is dying. Maybe a son is going through a wrenching divorce. Maybe a friend is in a place of struggling with addiction that they're not looking to embrace. And as was mentioned this morning in our first conference, talking about the meta crises that can be in our world. We're suffering, even if we have none of those other things. Just reading the news and seeing how many difficult things are going on between wars, natural disasters, all kinds of things. All that can sometimes move us into feeling very helpless. We want to check out. We want to be numb. We don't want to get involved at all. And in a sense, we give up the right to enter into that. And in a sense, we abandon our own suffering. Or perhaps we experience or extend well-meaning action that really does more to help us not experience the suffering in ourselves than to help another. Or ultimately, too, maybe we just worry. And just worrying, we know, doesn't do anything in itself. So I think when we look at Jesus' suffering and how to make suffering redemptive for ourselves, Jesus, I think, shows us to embrace it well. Ultimately, to spurn violence and our unhelpful reactions sometimes, to really seek to understand what is happening, especially when another comes toward us. To take the focus off of ourselves when we're suffering, and to be willing to be concerned about another. And ultimately, remembering the goal of why we're suffering. As we sung today, "Oh, that shame, now ended in his glory. Oh, that pain, now lost in joy unknown. Tell it out with praise, the whole glad story, human nature at the Father's throne." We know how the story ends. Yes, incredible suffering. John doesn't even get into all the gory details like others do. But we are called on this Good Friday to suffer well, to remember that we need to enter into the suffering of Jesus as an example to us, and to be willing to experience the resurrection, and to know that ultimately, as we hold suffering well, the joys that are available to us as we enter into that place. Let us, even now, as we hold this suffering, let us prepare our hearts to be able to share the whole glad story when we have those opportunities.